Say the words Britain and university. Around the world, and Oxford and Cambridge may well come to mind, but do they represent the real world at all? And are they missing out on attracting the most talented students? This is Roundtable with me, David Foster. Pillars of the British educational establishment, Oxbridge, as the two are known together, is where you can find many of the great minds of tomorrow. But colleges at both institutions are still opting for mostly white, privately educated applicants. Why is diversity still such a problem for Britain's leading higher education establishments?
Oxford and Cambridge universities, two of the most prestigious in the world, known together as Oxbridge. With their imposing architecture and history, everything about these places espouses exclusivity. But there's also a problem.
A lot of it is implicit bias and racism in the admissions procedure.
People are not really willing to admit that it's to do with race ever, and it's like if you talk about it, then you're playing the race card.
You walk around Cambridge and you don't see many non-white faces.
There's not enough black students being offered places at Oxbridge universities. Latest figures show that between 2010 and 2015, 1 in 3 Oxford colleges failed to offer any black student a place. But that's not the only issue here. Some students from minority backgrounds say that when they do manage to study here, they come across other social challenges.
So you get lots of questions like, oh, do black people do X, or why do black people do this, and stuff like that. So you're like the voice of your race. I worked in a pub over the summer in Oxford, and a lady called me aside that I was serving, and she went, "Oh, are you from Nigeria?" And I was like, "My parents are, yeah, how did you know?" And she goes, "Oh, because you guys always speak such good English." I was like, I am English.
The UK is like a deeply sick place in many ways, with a long history of colonialism, and its journalism sector through to its finance sector, through to most areas of public life, through to its education system, is deeply sick. What it can't do is keep inviting in students it thinks are going to be rich in the future and give it lots of money.
However, not everyone is full of criticism.
People here are very kind and aware. That's my personal experience. Everyone has been very nice to me. No one has been outright racist at all, and I'm kind of glad about that, because I was hoping I'd have a positive experience so that I can go and tell others, listen, it's not as bad as you think. Oxford is a normal place.
Cambridge isn't much better than Oxford when offering black students places. In 2016, 50 black students were offered a place at Cambridge. The figures show that 22% of black students who applied to Cambridge were offered a place, compared to 34.5% of white students. That's a difference of 12.3 percentage points. It's not just with students that there's an issue. From 2015 to 2016, there were no black academics in the elite staff category of managers, directors and senior officials. This is across universities in the UK, not just Oxbridge.
I think being a student at Cambridge has led me to look at myself differently as a black man. I think growing up in a very diverse community in North London, I wasn't really aware of it. I had black friends, I had Asian friends, I had white friends. But coming here, you are immediately aware of the fact that you are different, that you are a black man in a white man's world.
Cambridge University said that they admitted 39 black UK students in 2016 and spent $5 million a year on access work focused on BME students. But there are arguments that not enough black students are applying in the first place.
Despite both universities trying to cast a net wide and attract a more diverse set of students, the fact still remains that you're more likely to be offered a place at Oxford or Cambridge if you went to a private school like Eton than if you receive free school meals. And that inequality is what's at the heart of the problem.
There is fantastic talent being wasted because of someone's ethnic background or their social background or their family background. And what this means is that there are hundreds and thousands of young people not being given the opportunities they need to contribute positively to society.
These elite institutions are a reflection of British society. Politicians, civil servants, and many in the media come from Oxbridge. Changing the demographics of Oxbridge means changing Britain. But what else do these institutions need to do?
And I'm pleased to say we're joined via Skype today from Oxford by Samina Khan. She is the Director of Undergraduate Admissions and Outreach at the University of Oxford. With me at the Roundtable, Naomi Kelman, a member of the University of Oxford Black Alumni Network. And we have the Director of the National Education Opportunities Network, Graham Atherton. I am overawed by the intellect around me, all three Oxford graduates in one way or another. Naomi, let me come to you first of all. You were overawed, I think, a little bit at the beginning at Oxford. Why was that?
I grew up in Croydon. I'm the eldest of 6 girls. My parents didn't go to university. I went to a comprehensive school for my GCSEs and moved to a grammar school for A-levels. And so moving to Oxford was a culture shock because I've been used to diversity my entire life and it wasn't as diverse as Croydon.
But a culture shock in the sense that it was just simply different or that there was something wrong?
It was different. So I was the only black person in my college in my year. And when I got there, that was a surprise. And then the buildings were intimidating to me. I hadn't really been in buildings like that often. They're just buildings, but if you're not used to them, they can make you feel a bit out of place. I remember my first freshers' dinner, there was more than one set of cutlery. That was the first meal I'd ever had with more than one set of cutlery. And so
Freshers being the newbies?
Yes, yes. And so just getting used to that and feeling a little bit out of place, feeling as if a lot of other people had had those social experiences, which I hadn't.
Okay, I'll come back to you in a minute just to see if there's in fact something that could be done about that, because you can't do much about the buildings. But Graham, you say there are a lot of things that can be done to make things better. Give me the 1, 2, 3.
Well, I think firstly, Oxford is and could do a lot more working with younger pupils before they enter the university. The issues around achievement, supporting achievement, should be supported earlier on. So that's one point. Probably 13, 14 at least onwards. Even though Samina will say that is going on, more than that could happen. I think the colleges themselves should do more in terms of strategic commitment. You have some very enthusiastic young graduates working on outreach and access issues in many of the colleges.
One of whom is Naomi here, and we're going to talk about Target Oxford a little bit later.
Exactly. I mean, Naomi's moved on now and he's post-HE and developing great experiences, but I think for some of the colleges, they need to put more of their own resource strategically into this. And I think thirdly as well, as was picked up in the VT, I think if you're serious about this as an institution, you need to look at everything you're doing. You need to look at the curriculum, you need to look at the nature of the organisation, you need to look at the academic staff. And I think that is starting to happen, but it's not just a matter of sending some well-meaning recent graduates out into some comprehensive skills. It's more fundamental and deep-rooted than that.
Okay, Samina, why is it important that things change?
It is very important that things change, and things are changing. We want academically the very best students to come to Oxford. If we've got diversity, and then it means we've got a more vibrant place here at Oxford, and we are getting the very best students. I'd just like to pick up on some of Graham's points. In terms of strategic direction, we are very much looking at this, not just from an access point of view, but we're also looking at it from curriculum, staff, etc. So it is a much wider strategic aim for the university to diversify.
I want to ask you about the money side of things, because I've got a figure for Cambridge, which is £5 million a year, pounds goes into this sort of thing. I think you told me that it was something similar, maybe a little bit less, at Oxford. What do you use this money for?
So we do spend a similar amount. In fact, we spend £6 million on outreach activities. We use this money to attract students to Oxford, and we also use the money to encourage students to go on to higher education, because we realise for some Oxford is the place to be, but we also invest in those students who want to go to other universities, who might also want to go on to apprenticeships. So our scope is far wider than just Oxford itself, because we feel we should be playing a part in social mobility and ensuring that's happening across the country.
I'll welcome your opinion on this, but I'm going to bring it back to the studio for just a moment. David Lammy says social apartheid. And yet when you look at the figures, you've got 15.9% of Oxford undergraduates are from BME, black and minority ethnic groups, which is a bigger percentage than the UK population as a whole. He has to be wrong, doesn't he? Because more from
Yeah, I'd like
group are going to Oxford than is represented by the number in the population.
Some data on the socioeconomic backgrounds of that 15.9%, because I don't know, I mean, Naomi will know more about this. She's a much more recent graduate than I am, but the BME category can embrace in Oxford some students from quite affluent backgrounds, and I think it's the interaction of class and ethnicity, I think, is what David's getting at.
Well, let's ask Samina on that one. You can perhaps give us some background.
So 16% of our undergraduates in 2016 came from an ethnic minority background. If you look at our students who are from ethnic minority backgrounds, actually they're more likely to be from a disadvantaged background as well, Graham. So we do look at the intersection between disadvantage and race as well, particularly when you look at our black students who are from African and Caribbean backgrounds. They tend to be predominantly from a disadvantaged background because, as you said, what we want to do is to attract those and help those who aren't getting that support from school or from home.
Naomi, did you find it a difficult place to settle into because of the social differences, or because you were black?
It took me longer than my peers, I think, just because my cultural references were different. And so I was having to get used to a different sense of humour, different senses of cultural references, different TV shows.
But that would be the same whichever university you went to, wouldn't it?
Depending on the university, perhaps. I think more diverse universities, not so much. When I was in college specifically, I was the only black person in my year. And so it wasn't until I went to the African and Caribbean Society that I met other black people and could share in the things that I was a bit more used to. And so it's a longer adjustment.
But let me put it this way. I mean, if you come from an area where you were used to having people of a like mind and like looks around you, and you go somewhere different, by adopting or absorbing what that difference is, that makes you a more rounded person, perhaps.
I learned lots being at Oxford, and I think the lessons I learned from being around people who were different to me was great. And when I'm speaking with students on Target Oxbridge, I say difference isn't bad. You do have to embrace it and you can learn from it. But it is, of course, easier as a young person to feel comfortable somewhere if there are people like you. And so it's not that it's a bad thing, it's just that for students from minority groups, it takes longer to adjust, and given that it is intense adjusting to life at Oxbridge, that makes it a bit harder.
Tell me about Target Oxford. I know all three of you can chip in on this, but this is what you're currently working on at the moment. What is it?
Yes, so Target Oxbridge is the programme that...
Oxbridge, not Oxford, sorry.
Yes, we look at both Oxford and Cambridge. It's a programme that I started working on in 2012 whilst working at RED, the organisation I work for at the moment. It helps black, African and Caribbean students based in the UK apply to Oxford and Cambridge. The aim is to start working with them in year 12 and to break down this myth that there are no black students at either Oxford or Cambridge.
I think it's an excellent project. I think also, as Naomi and I discussed earlier on, that a lot of the focus of this is not necessarily, but also focusing on London students. And I think there's a regional issue to some of this as well. I think you have the presence in London if you're going to affect the BME participation rate, because a lot of BME students are in London. What I would say is, and I'm sure that Naomi would agree, is that if possible, such work could begin earlier on. And I think that's probably the resources, but I'm sure your organisations have the resources that the university has, and that possibly schools have to engage as well.
This is the point, isn't it? It needs to start in schools.
This is the point.
Because, Samina, you can tell me this. I think you say you give more interviews to people from disadvantaged and BME backgrounds than you would to people from privileged white backgrounds.
So what we have found last year is that people from disadvantaged backgrounds were more likely to get an offer from Oxford than their more privileged peer group. But I just want to pick up on the aspect of starting earlier. I fully agree we need to start earlier. And I think we need to start with students while they're still in primary school, because that's when the more advantaged students are having the discussions around dinner tables about going to university and their parents' experience of going to university and the fun they had and the friends they made. And so that's why we're starting to pilot working with a charity who actually is working with students from when they are in lower primary school, and trying to give them the vocabulary about education, about university, and the different courses that they might want to follow when they're older. And I think all the research points to, if students are given that opportunity and nurtured in that way, then they're more likely to succeed.
So Graham, would you say, I don't want to put words into your mouth, that by giving people from a quotes disadvantaged background for whatever reason a greater chance of interview at Oxford, perhaps Cambridge as well, that these people are either being given a lucky break or it's a simple levelling of the playing field.
I don't think they're given a lucky break at all. I mean, I think if you look at...
You might think that if you were a white student who didn't get an interview.
You could see that. You could see that. I think,
public school.
To be fair to the colleges, I think they're doing a lot of work on trying to balance this delicate question, David. But I think, as Samina says, they do want to attract, so they believe, the strongest students. And if you look at lucky breaks, I mean, those who went to private school had a lucky break all their life, David, to be fair. I mean, and all we're saying here is that those from more disadvantaged backgrounds should, in terms of interview, have what their educational experience is reflected in the interview process. I mean, you do not, for instance, pay £40,000 a year, whatever you pay to go to Eton, if you don't get an advantage, do you? It's a waste of money. Now, coming into interview, you're looking at people from very different backgrounds, very different educational experiences. It means a lot of different things to do your A-levels in the schools that a lot of the young people we work with went to, some of the schools which many of the young people who go to Oxford went to.
It's a funny old world, though, isn't it? Because here we are talking about people from disadvantaged backgrounds, finding it difficult, perhaps, to get into Oxford or Cambridge, and yet those that do, by definition of having been to Oxford or Cambridge, have an advantage over those that didn't. Who wants to pick that one up? Samina.
I was going to say where what we try to do in terms of selecting the students is to look at the background that they've come from. We look at the schools they've come from as well and try to put that context in place and try to look at how they've made the achievements they have made against those barriers. So I think it's fair to say all of that should be in place. So we try to create a fair and a level playing field where possible.
A fairer way of getting in. Did you find that, Naomi, that you were given the right help to go through this? I mean, blimey, it must be the toughest process in the world trying to get in there, tougher than breaking out of a maximum security prison.
Because I made the switch at A-level to a different school.
Yeah, you went to grammar school. Yeah.
Yes, and that school had sent people to Oxford and Cambridge before, and so I did manage to have a mock interview and there was support there.
Okay, what about your peers from your previous school?
None of
your
them
friends
went to Oxford or Cambridge.
No? Because they were not educationally smart enough, or because they weren't presented with the opportunity?
They weren't aspiring to it, I don't think. For us, a combination of GCSE results, the universities they were looking at, it was definitely something that you were looking at if you had the very top grades. If I could pick up on your point earlier about students having a benefit having gone to Oxford and Cambridge, I think there's sometimes an assumption that if you pass through Oxford and Cambridge, that will absolve everything that's happened to you beforehand and suddenly everything is easy. And Rare, the company I work at, works with students at university to help them into careers. And I was a candidate with them when I was at university. So whilst I'd got to Oxford, I was navigating Oxford, and then I had to also try to navigate graduate recruitment. And it wasn't that because I'd got to Oxford University, I suddenly understood everything about careers as well. And so it was only with help from Rare that I learned how to navigate graduate recruitment.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, to chip in again, I mean, I think you cannot deny that those who go to Oxford or Cambridge do go on to generally very good careers. Yet at the same time, many of those graduates put a lot back into society. I mean, without just looking at this panel here, it's not just a matter of going away and then thinking, I've finished now, I'm going to go and make, a lot of money, as much money as I possibly can. People go back and make a contribution and use probably the skills they've developed in their Oxbridge education to do that. And I think there's many examples of that happens.
Okay, Trinity?
Yes.
Lincoln?
Yes.
St Hilda is now going to be on the block, Samina, in the witness box, because I want these two to take on the teaching graduate and say what they think you should be doing that you're not doing. Naomi, your chance to lecture the lecturer.
I think starting earlier is definitely important. I know that we've spoken about that on a number of occasions, but thinking about black students, specifically the students that I work with, there's an attainment issue at both GCSE and A-level, and interventions earlier in the academic cycle would be helpful to target that.
Great.
And when we work with students, we are able to see if those students are pupil premium students, for example, because we have our own system that gathers that information from the students. I think it's the case that the university systems aren't able to see that. They look at postcode and they look at some wider things, but they're not able to know if a student has been on pupil premium. Samina, correct me if I'm wrong. And I know that's a complex issue with UCAS and a number of things, but I think if universities could be lobbying
UCAS being
to have
the admissions
access,
service.
yes,
Yeah.
if they could be lobbying to have access to that information, that would be good. And finally, we have tried in the past to access government data so we can target black students at GCSE who've done very well, and we cannot access that data. We can't get it out of government. Universities might be in a better position to lobby for access to that data.
What do you think, Samina?
I totally agree. We've also been lobbying UCAS and we've been lobbying government as well to give us access to data so that we can target students much better and we have more reliable information on them. So that is something we are currently working on and continuing to work on.
Did they say why they won't give you this information, the government officials?
They haven't explained why. They said they're thinking about it very hard and they should be getting back to us shortly, which I hope is not too long. But that information on pupil premium, on free school meals for the whole of the university sector would be incredibly useful. And I was just going to say, I totally agree with working earlier. I think universities maybe not equipped to work with primary school children. It's not our area of expertise, but we are more than willing to work with partners who are experts in that area.
Okay,
and we can bring something to the table.
Primary school, well, that's an interesting one. But Graham, you wanted Lincoln College to put St Hilda's on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the things that the university could do more, I mean, I think in Samina's position it's difficult. The university is based around 20 odd different colleges. And these colleges are very autonomous bodies. And they think of themselves as autonomous bodies. Now, those colleges have very different levels of commitment to the access agenda. And Samina knows that's the case. Now,
You mean some are obdurate?
some are more committed and have more resources than it than others. It will be a first starting point to get all colleges at the same level of commitment. And I think the second point is, I think there is more that the university could do to lead and cooperate with others nationally. I know it's doing some good work in the Oxfordshire area. It could do more nationally. It could do more in London as well. I think it's not just about London, but it's the BME question in London, which is worth looking at. I think the final point is, I know that Samina's focusing on this as well, there's a role for teachers in this. I think many teachers obviously want their students to do as best as possible, but many teachers also have some perceptions of Oxford and Cambridge, which might not always be helpful. So, and I know that that's difficult. I know universities are doing a lot in that area. I think
Which comes, brings us around towards the end of the programme, to your understanding of what it meant to be at Oxford, rather than the perception you had before you went there. Samina, let me ask you first of all, you're at the heart of the establishment now. When you finished your course at Oxford, and it was your second degree, when you finished there, did you have a different feeling about the place than when you started?
Certainly I did, yes. I think obviously Oxford was a much more familiar place, and I think that's really important to make Oxford more familiar to a wider range of students who aspire to go on to higher education. A big part of my job is to normalise Oxford, and that we do that by going out to schools, and we also do it by bringing a large number of school children into Oxford so that they can experience life as an undergraduate here. As we said earlier, to get used to the buildings, the cutlery, the dining halls, etc. And ultimately, these are the students for whom Oxford, will rest on their shoulders, and they'll be taking Oxford forward.
But let me ask you, Naomi, I mean, the phrase normalise Oxford, it's a little bit like sort of going to a school sports day and trying to normalise the Olympics, isn't it?
I don't think so. I think it's something everybody should be able to aspire to. You should hopefully be able to know that if you're bright and academically able and you would like to go to Oxford or Cambridge, that you should be able to do so. And whilst I had some time adjusting and my first year was a bit challenging, by the end I was having a great time and I was very happy that I'd done it. I learned an awful lot about myself academically and about the world. And if you asked me if I'd do it again, I most definitely would.
But you'd do it again with one thing missing? If you could take one thing out and kick it away, what would it be?
My lack of self-confidence. When I got to Oxford, I was waiting for them to send me home because I thought that I shouldn't really be there, and I was there by mistake because I had this lack of confidence because of my background, basically.
Graham, you describe it as a working class background. Did you gain confidence by being at a place like?
I'm not sure I gained confidence by being there, and I think
so what did you learn?
You can't normalise. You can try and normalise this experience, but you can't, because it's usually different from what many of the students from working class backgrounds are used to. And they're going to be minorities. in there, and they're going to be challenged. I think particularly socially, as Naomi's pointed out. I think, though, at the same time, they're trailblazers. You need to make sure you encourage those students to go, but you can't minimise the challenges they're going to face when they're there. And me and many of my peers, and it's to many ways, it was over 25 years ago that I went to Oxford, and to hear the fact that now the situation on the VT in here is similar to what it was then, it is not a good thing, really, from Henry's point of view. But
I know we are coming
to move on, really, I suppose.
We're coming towards the end of the programme. I want to thank you all very much indeed. I suppose one thing I would like to have got into, but we'll maybe do this on another occasion, because time is short, is that being in a difficult situation sometimes prepares you better for the next time you face a difficult situation, so that when you go into the real world, when you start your first day at the City Bank or a newspaper, you know to some extent what to expect. Thank you all very, very much indeed for coming on this programme. We've never had such an educated panel. I have to say it has been an education. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.